Hi, y'all. Welcome to the COVID crisis, impact on communities of color, a medical perspective with Dr. Clyde Yancey. I am going to pass him the mic and thank him so much for joining us today.
COVID-19, or more recently, speaking about the very important issues of racism in our society to a number of different kinds of audiences, predominantly healthcare audiences, physicians, cardiologists like myself. I've also spoken to other enterprises, churches, businesses, jazz clubs. Any number of groups of people want to know. Tell us about COVID-19. What does it mean? What happens next? And now so many people need to have an opportunity to ventilate, to understand, to feel, to react to these stark issues that have been exposed so painfully to all of us about racism. Let me start by thanking you as a community. It strikes me that over your history, for decades, theater has been where we go to find the truth. You have used your stories to entertain, to engage, but you've also used your stories, your persona, your skills to communicate, to impact, to influence, to insert emotion. Part of the reason why I'm a patron of the arts is that I never leave a good performance without feeling something. And it's you in the arts community that really help incite those feelings. I was really emboldened to look at the number of entities that support your theater group and to realize that at their core, what brings them all together is telling stories. And I think it will be the way in which we craft, tell, and then promulgate those stories that will be part of our healing, part of our way to come back. I'm supposed to say good morning to those that are on the West Coast or here in the Midwest, or good afternoon to those that are on the East Coast. But I'd rather say, let's spend the next 30 to 40 minutes having not necessarily a good morning or a good afternoon, but an important morning or an important afternoon. The things that we need to consider are likely going to be very different than any other session that you've experienced in TCG. No PowerPoints, no PDFs, but really an honest conveyance of information to really help expand your awareness and to entertain your questions. I have deliberately truncated what I intend to say so that I can preserve sufficient time to receive your questions, respond to your questions. If I don't know an answer, I'll tell you I don't know an answer. If I do know the answer, I'll share it with you in a very plain spoken way. And if necessary, retrieve an answer and communicate via the liaisons that I've been working with over the last 24 to 36 hours to stand up this program. So again, thank you for the invitation. As a physician, as a communicator, as an educator, I like to think in threes. And so the three big themes I want to convey. First, I think we all would love to know, okay, can you just give me the summary? Tell us about COVID-19. What is that all about? Happy to do that, and happy to expand that and share with you how it has impacted very important populations. I've heard people talk about special populations. I'd rather emphasize important populations because they are your patrons, they are your actors, they are the essential workers that keep your theaters moving. So let's call them important populations. Next, I really would like to help you from a medical perspective understand some highlights, some points that I've shared with your organizers already that I think are seminal, critical in the successful re-engagement of your patient community, but also in the successful engagement of your actors, your performers, the persons who make your industry thrive. And then as a third piece, I will share with you what I think are some important themes about social justice and how all of this intersects. Let's begin. Beginning sometime in the fall of 2019, we began to understand reports of a very peculiar viral illness, a viral illness that was similar to SARS, the severe acute respiratory distress syndrome virus that generated so much havoc 17 or 18 years ago and then struck Toronto just about a decade ago. That alerted us to the fact that there are these mutated viruses that may appear in our milieu, for lack of a better word, that may have great consequence. What was so peculiar about this virus is that it started off with something that I suspect every one of us has seen before. If you've had the common cold, it's a good chance you've had coronavirus. But this was a novel, N-O-V-E-L, novel coronavirus, because it developed a peculiar mutation, a mutation which gave it a unique proclivity. That means a unique point of entry into lung tissue. And the consequence was devastating. Lung failure, respiratory difficulties, and ultimately, it really has led to an unwarranted and unimaginable toll on life and health. What we know about it is this: it is a respiratory illness at the outset. It propagates by human to human transmission. It is particularly onerous in people that are older, over the age of 60. I'm 62, so I've been decidedly careful over the last 3 months. Those with underlying hypertension, those with underlying heart disease, obesity, diabetes, maybe a slight predilection for men. These are the risk factors that we've seen. We know that this virus is ubiquitous now. About 1.5 million infections in the country, and we're still testing. We unfortunately eclipsed 100,000 deaths. This is with us, and it will likely remain with us. I won't say there's good news, but there is a lesser iteration, a lesser version of this, and that's the version that younger persons experience. It is tantamount to a flu-like illness, and after some number of days or weeks, the symptoms pass. But for the older patient, the older person, the consequences can be dire. Let me continue to populate this primer on what we're dealing with. Because if you're like me, as a citizen, I would have these questions, and I suspect you have these questions. So what do we do about this? Several points, and I'll be very, very specific here. Point one, it's not over yet. That means that we have to continue to practice the right preventive measures. Social distancing without social isolation. Strict hand hygiene. We have a little bit less sensitivity about surfaces, although that's still possible. So reasonable environmental hygiene is important, but not at the level of rigor that we thought 2 or 3 months ago. So the first thing we do about this is remember, it's not over. Continue to take the right preventive measures. The second thing, we need to be very aggressive about testing. Any symptoms, any concerns of exposure, present for testing. If you test positive, let those in your immediate vicinity know that you tested positive. It only takes about 8 to 10 minutes of close human exposure, not necessarily even physical contact, particularly if someone is sneezing or coughing. So do have an egalitarian approach here and let others know if you've been exposed, and particularly if you test positive. If you're young and healthy, respect the 14 days of quarantine. Next, we are working very diligently through all of medicine to find treatments for COVID-19. Coronavirus is the viral vector that causes the illness, but the illness is COVID-19, named for the occurrence of this respiratory illness in 2019. Many of my peers are working on highly structured, highly organized, well-designed clinical trials, different from the things you've heard in the news, to answer these important questions. In fact, I'm leading one of these trials, and it's what I do every day, trying to desperately find an answer. We will find something that works. We do know that an antiviral agent, I pause when I say this to a lay audience, but it's called remdesivir. But we do know that for the right group of patients, it appears to at least minimize some of the illness, but it's not a cure. We remain very encouraged that if we capture the plasma from persons who have developed their own antibodies and have responded to the COVID-19 illness, we might be able to repurpose the antibodies in that plasma as therapy. What that means is that all of us, if our immune systems are intact, have the ability to generate these proteins. These proteins are uniquely targeted towards this novel coronavirus. And they do something in medicine that we call neutralize. That means they actually eliminate the consequences of that virus being in our system. We're beginning to understand that we can take advantage of that property and use it therapeutically. So we can harvest the plasma from those that have recovered and then use it to treat those that are still ill. That is a work in progress. What we all wish for, and I hope I have your rapt attention right now, what we all wish for is this phenomenon of herd immunity. Now, if you're not a scientist, it's like, what the heck does that mean? Because herd makes you think of things that are in agriculture or livestock. But what it really means is just like you think of a herd of animals, we are a herd of people. And the way that we don't suffer the consequences of this again is if our herd is relatively immune from this illness. We know that the threshold for herd immunity is at about 60%, maybe 70%. So once we get to that threshold where we are protected, then we know that the consequences of a recurrent outbreak would be much less, not zero, but much less. Now, how do we get to herd immunity? There really are two fundamental ways. We call them active and passive, but what it really means is that if you've had the disease and you've recovered and you've developed antibodies on your own and they are neutralizing antibodies, then you have some measure of immunity. To what extent remains to be tested, but you have some measure of immunity. So one part of the herd will have immunity because they've had the infection. The other part of the herd is waiting for a vaccine. I've had an opportunity to review the primary data in vaccine development. I have a close working relationship with the National Institutes of Health, the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, and I spend a lot of my Saturdays on conference calls with my peers at a national level, understanding what do we do next. Quietly, we are very enthused with the progress that's being made with certain vaccines, up to and including vaccines that are already entering phase 3. Now, again, if you're not in my world, phase 3 means absolutely nothing to you. But think about phase 3 as your pre-production theater event. Almost ready to go. You're testing it in front of a live audience, making certain that everything clicks, everything works. In medicine, phase 3 means that we've gone past the hypothesis. We've identified the risk and benefits. We've assured ourselves that there's reasonable safety. Now we're seeking proof that it actually works. Phase 3 will take us into the next flu season because in humans, we have to show that the vaccine that's being developed will prevent those who get the vaccine largely from getting the infection, and those who don't get the vaccine or get the placebo will still be exposed to the infection. If all goes well, it's conceivable that in 2021, we will have a candidate vaccine. But here's the other challenge. There are many people who have some misgivings about receiving a vaccination. We know this from our experience with the flu vaccine. If we don't reach that threshold of 60%, then we're still at risk for having a calamitous collapse of our economy, our society, once again, if this infection occurs. Now, let me do a pivot, and I hope that you're still following along with me, because what I'm going to share with you now is about those important populations I told you about before. We have learned, and I've helped to bring this information to the attention of the medical community and now the lay community, that certain groups of people are uniquely affected. And it's those people whereby their life and living circumstances prevent them from being able to practice social distancing, working from home, even good hygiene, not having access to sanitizers, not being able to get testing on demand. Those communities are our poor communities, our minority communities, the communities on the south side of Chicago, just 10 miles from me, the communities in New Orleans, Louisiana, where I lived for 5 years, the communities in Detroit, Michigan, where I frequently go to serve as a consultant for institutions in Detroit. These are unacceptable observations. In Blacks, the infection rate here in Chicago is 2 to 3 times higher. 60%, 60% of all the deaths due to COVID-19 in Chicago, my home city, are in Blacks, but we only make up 33% of the population. I follow a very important data set, the American Public Media Research Labs. I said that so deliberately because I would love for you to go to the American Public Media Research Labs website, type in COVID-19. What you see will be astonishing. As we speak, the likelihood of death for a Black compared to a white with COVID-19 is 2.4 times higher. Here is the most startling statistic. If every group actually experienced the same degree of risk due to COVID-19, 14,000 more Blacks would be alive right now. That's worth a pause moment. 14,000 more Blacks would be alive right now. That is an unacceptable loss. It's a loss that wasn't controllable, and this loss has happened for several reasons. First, many individuals that are Black or Latino, some Asian, or essential workers, they keep the food lines going. They staff the hospital environmental resources. They are the mass transit workers. I worked with public transit organizations in New York City. They reached out to me. 96 transit workers have died. 96. These are the people that work the subways, the buses. 96 have died, and I know the number is higher now. These are essential workers. The other reason why this group of people is at such greater risk, think about the density of their housing circumstances. These are not homes that were designed to accommodate 8, 10, and 12 people of multi-generational families. So one gets it, everybody has it. So we start with a set of life and living circumstances that generates increased exposure, and then the sinister part happens. I told you in the beginning, the people that suffer the greatest consequence are the ones that have high blood pressure, diabetes, obesity, known cardiovascular disease. Guess which groups carry that burden the most? That's right, Blacks, and to a lesser extent, but still in a very real way, Hispanics, Latinx. There's an even worse tragedy here, and it's in our Native American population, particularly our Pueblo Indians. I know one of the sponsoring organizations here is in Arizona. My heart goes out to you. those tribes still in Arizona have a shockingly high burden of COVID-19 that far eclipses what we see in New York City, the designated epicenter. That's what's happening in your Pueblo nations. So when you bring all this together, you begin to appreciate that not only has COVID-19 disrupted our economy, damaged our social network, caused incredible harm in our communities, illness, and unfortunately death, it has exposed the deep chasm in health quality in our country. It has illuminated with a spotlight the underbelly of our healthcare system. There are evident racial disparities that can no longer be argued. And this burden is disproportionate. And in a civil society, as I've written many times in the medical and lay literature, we should not allow this magnitude of disproportionate pain and suffering. I told you there would be three themes that I would talk about. This first theme I've completed, giving you the history of coronavirus, the history of COVID-19 infection in our country, where we're going with treatment, what happens next. Please, please, please don't forget this crisis isn't over and prevention is still our best treatment. And I've shared with you in a very sobering way what's happening to these important populations. Let's pivot. Like you, I really look forward to being able to re-engage in our society. I do not want to go back to normal. I want to seek a better normal. But to get there, there's going to be some awkwardness. There will be some steps we all have to tolerate so that we don't lose ground. Let me be very explicit again, as I was once before, and talk about those steps. And it'll be 5 steps that I will share with you. First, as you think about re-establishing your enterprise, theater performances, it's fortuitous that we're coming up on the early summer. The safest place to congregate is outdoors. We know from the work that's come out of China. I'm also a scientific journal editor, and we received some of the very earliest reports from Wuhan, China in March. Those individuals have continued to stand up very nobly, very appropriately, and are still educating us. We know from their work that 80% of the infections happen in indoor environments with close human contact. Outdoors, where there's ventilation, where it's easier to have some distance between people, and particularly with masks, that's your safest venue. It will still require hand sanitizers and masks, but if you were thinking about getting up and running quickly, that might be an approach. Second, indoor venues is your core culture. That's where you are. I love going to the theater, having a seat and looking up at the stage and imagining, gosh, what's about to happen now? This is going to be so exciting. But that's going to be a challenging enterprise. A couple of things about that. First, anything you can do to appropriately ventilate your indoor environments, recirculating fresh air will be helpful. You've heard it again. I'm going to say it again. Distance matters here. You want to create 6 feet of space between your patrons, whether you take out rows or block seats, that's your choice. The aesthetics may look and feel awkward, that's your choice. But I think for you to allow your customers, your patrons, to feel as though it's safe to come back, you have to anticipate making these kinds of steps. Some might argue that putting up plexiglass, transparent barriers intermittently to reduce the possibility of transmission if someone's coughing or sneezing might be helpful. Another strategy would be to screen persons for fever before they come in the theater. I come to work every day and I have to walk past the laser camera every day, and any day that my temperature is elevated, hadn't been so yet, I would be sent home. Something for you to think about. We go through a questionnaire when I walk in the building. Do you have any symptoms? If we are honest and you say yes, you turn around, you can't come in. These are the things you might want to replicate if you're thinking about an indoor environment. You hear a lot of conversation about HEPA filters. There's not a lot of evidence yet to convince us that HEPA filters really make a difference. It really is about ventilation. So think about daytime performances with the doors open. It may vary from one venue to the next. So another thought that I think is worthwhile. The next is seating. Seating really should be thoughtfully planned. There is going to be some reduction in capacity. Many of you have theaters with tiers. You may find that even skipping a whole tier is another way to help your patrons feel better about things. The business models for that will be challenging. I understand that, and I can only say I apologize for that, but I think the public toll is even more challenging. So be creative, be inventive. The next thing I think that's important is don't count on your patrons to be fully equipped with masks or hand sanitizers. At some point in time, public statutes about wearing masks will change. I'm already, unfortunately, seeing only about 50% of citizens here in my community still wearing masks. Be upright, stand up, and pass out the mask as people are coming into your theater. You might do clever things. You might have your logo on the mask. You might have some other messaging on the mask, but do provide that extra level of safety so that patrons will feel comfortable coming back. The fifth thing that I will share with you about re-engaging is that I think you have to be very thoughtful about your most precious asset. That's your actors, that's your performers, that's your dancers, that's your musicians. They are necessarily in close personal contact. Take a page from the professional sports organizations. They're going to enact very frequent testing, on some occasions daily even. But in so doing, you can be certain that at that moment in time, no one is actively infected. If someone tests positive, you've done them a service. You have given them something valuable. They can then self-quarantine and come back healthy. But do consider that that's not a cost. That's an investment in your most precious commodity. So the five things that I've shared with you about re-entering, I'll restate because I think they're incredibly important. The first, the safest environment is outdoors. The second, as you re-emerge in an indoor environment, ventilation, fresh air is really, really important. Maybe intermittent plexiglass shields will be important. The third thing, seating will be important. Space, yes. Skip rows, yes. Maybe keep certain tiers unoccupied. That seems to make a lot of sense to me. And I would have no seating proximate to the musicians or proximate to the performers. Give them that extra bit of safety as well. My fourth statement to you is be upright and say, we will provide masks and hand sanitizers for our patrons. This is not forever, because remember, once we get to herd immunity, we don't have to worry nearly as much. But if we're trying to stand up your enterprise over the next weeks to months, this is the advice I'm sharing with you. And the fifth piece is think about what I believe to be your most precious commodity, those that make us come to our feet and give a standing ovation. And it's your performers, your actors, your musicians, your dancers, your production crew. Give them that benefit of saying, we want to help preserve your health. That's the second big piece. I told you the first big piece is, what is coronavirus? What's been our experience with COVID-19? What about the important populations? The second big piece was, as you re-engage your enterprise, what are the things you need to know? What are the things you need to do differently? How can you do this safely? I I've given you 5 steps, and I'm happy to revisit those in the Q&A if you wish. The most important part of me being with you today is to really share with you my perspective through my physician lens, through my clinical scientist lens, through my public health advocate lens, and through my personal history lens, what is so vitally important about our current crisis, our current strife, recognizing the pernicious, painful weight of racism that is so deeply baked into our society. Appreciate that I started this conversation about COVID-19 and very quickly got to how it impacts important populations. And now I'm talking about racism. You know what? All of this tracks to the same root cause. The life and living circumstances of people makes a profound difference in their health and in social justice. Poverty is brutal. It kills people. Lack of an education is sinister. It disables people. Poor food choices is murderous. It causes people to die and die earlier. Living in crime-filled communities, living in housing situations that are not safe or overly dense, generates biological manifestations of stress that then becomes evident in the burden of hypertension, the burden of heart disease. It may seem odd, but COVID-19 here and racism here, they intersect on this phenomenon that my world describes as the social determinants of health. This is quantifiable. Whenever the census is taken, and please do fill out your census forms, but whenever the census is taken, the Centers for Disease Control aggregates 15 variables in the census and uses that to quantify census tracts according to the SV, as in victory, I. I come from Louisiana, so letters like V are really hard for me to enunciate. But the SVI is the Social Vulnerability Index. The closer it is to 0, the more resilient your community is for stress, for pandemics, for disruptive events. The closer it is to 1, the more vulnerable your community is. Let me be very, very direct now. In downtown Chicago, Streeterville, where my office is, in fact, where my home is, the social vulnerability index is 0.09. 10 miles from here, on the south side of Chicago, the social vulnerability index is 0.99. It's a tenfold difference. You know what? The life expectancy between downtown and the south side is 30 years. We all had the deepest, most painful emotive response when we saw a knee to the neck of another human being for 9 minutes. This morning, I participated, in fact, led a silent 10-minute moment of observation on our medical campus, attended by over 1,000 healthcare professionals wearing their white coats. And all we did at 8:30 this morning was to just simply kneel for 10 minutes. And as I was kneeling, I thought, how can that be? 10 minutes of your entire weight on another human's neck. How could that be? But then understand the metaphor. For many persons who look like me, to be very candid now, there's been a knee on our neck for decades. I was born in 1958 in the Deep South. You can only imagine what my acculturation was like. There's been a knee on our neck for decades. And that's what needs to change. And if there's anything there is anything that comes out of what we've experienced as a society, it's just some semblance of fairness. Move the knees. That would make the biggest difference. So I have kept my word. I told you that I would speak with you. I would truncate my comments to about 20, 25 minutes. I think it's been nearly 30. But we still have designated time, sufficient time, that I would enjoy answering your questions. There's a chat function. Please enter your questions in the chat function. A number of your aligned staff, peers, are committed to help me navigate these questions, but I'm going to open the chat function right now and do my best to answer the questions. So there'll be a pause as I'm reading through this. So give me just a moment and I will start answering these questions. So the first question is to repeat the 5 things that are critical for reopening. Very important point, and this is a point of emphasis I'd like to make with you. The safest environment is outdoors. Many of you are adept at outdoor productions. Even with outdoor productions, face masks and sanitizers. Spacing will be easier to achieve outdoors, but don't be lax. Spacing is still important. The second, for indoor performances, I think it is obligatory that it's a well-ventilated environment. Consider, if you can, intermittently positioning plexiglass shields just to halt the transmission from speech, from voice, from coughing, from sneezing. Do some sort of simple screen as your patrons come in, whether it's for temperature or just for symptoms. Just that pause moment to get people to reconsider, hey, if you got a symptom, if you're not feeling great, how about you come to the next performance? Don't come to this performance. Number 3, seating. Look at your own venue. There is no one guideline that's going to work across the country for all your multiple different theaters. But some of you that have chairs that are not affixed to the floor, you can spread them out. Some of you that have multiple tiers in your venues, you can keep one tier empty. Seating and the space in the seating is important. That's number 3. Number 4, stand up, provide the mask, provide the hand sanitizers. Have fun with the mask. My goodness, there are all kinds of symbols I'm seeing on mask right now. It can be even a mask that matches a performance that afternoon, that evening. So have fun with it. And then E is incredibly important. Protect your most precious commodity. Protect your talent. Facilitate their testing. Help them if they need quarantine. Keep their jobs if they have to step away for 2 weeks. Give them the comfort to be honest about their symptoms. So thank you for bringing that question up. Those are the 5 things. Shout out about Feinberg School of Medicine. Someone in the audience has been there. Thank you very much. Chat has been funky. I'm sorry about that. Somebody's working on that. That's good. Okay, here is an incredibly important set of questions. It's a very thoughtful question. We don't yet know, but we are concerned that there may be some long-term consequences of COVID-19. I've got patients of my own that have been struggling with COVID-19. We will get them through. I say that candidly. We will get them through. But they will have consequences. Scarred lungs, perhaps even some cardiovascular injury or damage. But what I'm most worried about is this, the emotion of being isolated, not just isolated, but being segregated. People not wanting, not being able to come in your room. Imagine not being able to engage with your loved one during a point of crisis when you know that you're ill, when you know that the outcomes may not be good and you can't even feel the human touch. I read an essay this morning, early this morning. My days are very long, nights are short, mornings start early, but I read an essay this morning about the fact that we are biologically wired to respond to human touch. Think about people who have gone weeks without human touch. So I really do worry, even though I'm a cardiologist and a classically trained physiologist, I'm really worried about the cognitive issue, the emotional issue, the neuro issue. So brilliant question about consequences. I think we will deal with the consequences of COVID-19 for quite some time. The next issue, and again, another insightful question, what about this condition we're seeing in children? We're worried. It looks like it's yet another manifestation of the coronavirus, but it's being experienced differently in children. Here's the takeaway. If you have young children, if you have nieces, nephews, if you're a grandparent, if there are small children in your world, forget about what you heard at the beginning. The children were safe. They were immune. They could not become infected. Yes, they can become infected, and they can become vectors and transmit it to other people unknowingly, because their instinct, they know the benefit of touch and they want to touch mom and dad and uncle and grandparents. Yeah, we got to be careful with that. A couple other questions here. Oh, brilliant question. Oh gosh, I wish I would have thought of this. I would have included it as number 6. What about the restrooms? What about intermission? I go to the theater year round for important personal reasons. I'll leave it at that. And as I do so, boy, at intermission, it is a herd. You hear that word again, going to the restroom. It's a herd that's not equitable, by the way, because women wait in longer lines than men. Somebody needs to fix that one day. But nevertheless, you've got a herd of people this close, waiting to get to the restroom, using the same facilities. Lots of recalibration needs to be done there. I mean, lots of recalibration. There's got to be a way to control how many people are going to the restroom. There's got to be a way to make ubiquitous availability of hand sanitizers, antiseptic wipes in those bathrooms. That's going to be a challenge. It's a great question. Even the people that you hire to come into those restrooms and clean them constantly understand that they are essential workers. The same model I told you about, they will be at risk. Let's all think very carefully about a way to do that. One solution might be, particularly if it's outdoors, you just have sufficient portable restrooms at additional expense. Yes. Within a venue, if you are reducing attendance by 50%, that may right correct your load in your restrooms. But here's another thought. Why do you only have one intermission? There's no rule that says you should only have one intermission. In this environment, why can't you have 2 intermissions? And why can't you trust adults to say, we're doing 2 intermissions so that we can space out access to the restrooms? Be on an honor system. If you go during the first intermission, sit during the second and let those that sat during the first go in the second. Or even do something as ordinary as, hey, you get the purple dot, you get the green dot. Purple, you go during the first intermission. Green, you go during the second intermission. You know, I'm thinking real time with you out loud. Some may giggle at what I just said, but something that simple could decongest the restrooms and make a difference. So great question. Okay, can you get COVID-19 from using shared toilet facilities? The implication of what I just suggested to you is yes, in theory, it is possible. If you are touching a surface shortly after someone who has COVID-19 has sneezed or coughed, and particularly after you touch that surface, you touch your face, you scratch your eyelid, that could do it. So all of us have to practice a totally different level of personal hygiene. And I don't mean to say that in a fearful way. I mean to say that in a constructive way. Get accustomed to thinking about the surfaces when you're in an unfamiliar place. Do what I do now. Carry this with you. I have sanitizer with me all the time, and I'm constantly wiping my hands down. I touch an elevator button, I'm wiping my hands. I exit my hospital building, I'm wiping my hands. That kind of behavior is something that we need to think about. Elevators. What's most unsafe about elevators, it's not the buttons actually. What's most unsafe about elevators is the people. You really want to practice safe distancing in your elevators. Many of you have these beautiful, beautiful venues, 50, 60, 70 years old from the golden era with tiny elevators. Whew, that's going to be a challenge. You really can't afford to have more than 2 or 3 people in those elevators. And that needs to be a hard stop. You can't look the other way and let 8 people get in the elevator. That needs to be a hard stop. Signage at least needs to say only 2 or 3 allowed at a time if you've got those smaller elevators. I'm a cardiologist. Guess what? Stairs are healthy. And so that may be the thing to think about. Oh, this is a great question. For those who are teaching and you're dealing with small groups of people and you're necessarily interfacing, engaging, getting close, how can you be protected? Until we get to the level of herd immunity and understanding that this is just temporary and it won't be very aesthetic, here's what I would suggest. Wear the mask and wear the shield. The shields are now available commercially. For your group of 6 or 7, your actors, your performers, wear the mask. As well, get 6 feet away. You don't need to be in the personal space for the majority of your instruction, I would think. So practice the distance. For the teacher, mask and the shield. For the students, hand hygiene and the mask, 6 feet from each other. It may be some very different sort of things. Use Zoom for your classes and let people participate in your classwork in their home environment via Zoom. But remember, this isn't going to be forever. These are just the steps over the next several months to get through this and get your enterprises up again. I've been asked to scroll up for other questions. That's a good point. So let me not cheat those who had immediate questions. Oh boy. Yeah. This is really going to be an important issue. And as I told you in the beginning, when I don't know, I'll let you know I don't know, so I can only opine. For those of you that are costume fitters, where you have to get very close, I can't really give you guidance, but I can tell you this. In every state, every Department of Public Health is providing guidance for hair salons, nail salons, massage parlors, etc., where there is close human contact that is necessary to conduct business. I would exactly emulate what your departments of public health say about close contact for business purposes. And I think for those of you that are close fitters, that's probably the best advice I can give you. Likely it's going to mean one customer or one actor at a time, as short a period of time in that encounter as possible. So I would have the usual perfunctory chat virtually. It would be business in the fitting room. I'd get to it, get it done quickly. The actor, fitter, personal protection, but pay attention to the Department of Public Health websites and look uniquely at what's being said about those persons whose work involves close contact. This is very important. Nobody gets a pass. If I've been so explicit and so insistent on protecting the talent, the actors, the musicians, double down for the production crew, because they're in close proximity to the musicians, close proximity to the talent. I've had the opportunity to go backstage. I see the environment. They're not well ventilated areas. I would allow, in fact, I would hope that the production crew gets the same access to testing, the same permission to step away if a test is positive, and the same access to personal protective equipment. So that was a very good point that was made.
Hey, Dr. Yancey, I want to jump in. This is Amelia from TCG and
Yes.
give a 5-minute warning. and also uplift one of our first questions in the Q&A about where we can access accurate, easy to understand information to share with our communities. And that was a question by Claudia Alec.
Ms. Alec, that's a wonderful question. I will tell you that in truth, even though it's been much maligned, the CDC website provides very good information that is plain spoken and it's nicely refereed. So I would use that as step one. Step two, in whatever state you happen to reside, I would visit your Department of Public Health websites. I have been so emboldened by the way in which so many people in public health have really taken to task the responsibility for being purveyors of correct information. I'd be very cautious with indiscriminate searches on the internet. There are those who inexplicably think the pandemic is fake. There are those who, beyond any comprehension, believe that masks and hand sanitizers are superfluous and of no benefit. And I really, really, really worry about those that fall into a camp that dismiss the benefit of any vaccine. If they won't take the vaccination for themselves, take it from me, dadgummit. Until we get to 60% immunity, we will not be protected. That may be contentious for some, controversial for others, but it will be helpful for many. So thanks for that. If you're interested in the data I shared with you about the perverse influence on important populations, remember it's the American Public Media Research Labs website. So I've given you 3 resources: CDC, your own Department of Public Health, and the APM Research Labs website. I think that will be very helpful. I will tell you, through the course of this, I have been impressed with some of the national media outlets and their ability to curate really important information. I call out the Washington Post. They have worked really closely with the Hopkins Center. Much of their information is not only accurate, but they're first to release it. So that might be helpful. The Atlantic has run a series of unbelievably well thought, well configured, if you will, essays on what we need to know. But we need to all be careful judges of the information that we otherwise extract from internet resources. And I'll leave that statement stand. We've got about 2 minutes left. Boy, there's a lot of other stuff going on. For those of you that have thanked us for these comments, my thanks actually go to you. You have allowed this information to be introduced into what I would call your curriculum. I'm a teacher at heart, I can't help it. But thank you for understanding the importance of not only having the conversations about coronavirus and COVID-19, not only appreciating what's important about the important populations, not only for embracing the advice that I can share with you about reopening and standing up your enterprise, but thank you for caring enough about our society and about those people that have been aggrieved for decades and wanting to do something differently. I will end like I began. One of the most beautiful things about theater is that you've always been the voice that otherwise wasn't being heard. You've always had the courage to convey the messages that weren't being shared. And you've always had the resolve, even against strident opposition, to stay on point and to stay true. And for that, you have a remarkable enterprise, a truly American enterprise that really not only values but champions free speech. Keep doing what you do, guys. It's wonderful. I got to get back to taking care of patients over the telephone. So thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to be with you.
Thank you, Dr. Yancey, so much for joining us. I will let you go, Dr. Yancey. I'll keep this line open for a few more minutes if you want to grab resources out of the chat, but I will also post these links in Mighty Networks so we can refer back to them.
Thanks much.
everybody. I believe we are live on HowlRound. I believe we are live in our webinar. We're going to hold for a moment to make sure folks can join us. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the Native Nation Plenary. And please hold with us before we begin.
그거 자꾸 그러지 마.
Welcoming to the stage, Elena Chang. Take it away.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to TCG's third and final plenary. I'm Elena Chang, the Director of ED&I Initiatives, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I want to thank Alicia Harris and Whitney White for your conversation yesterday and for your work as artists, which means so much to so many of us. Before we get started, we need to say her name, Breonna Taylor. Today, she would have turned 27 years old. She was a first responder and EMT during a global pandemic. She once said, "Working in healthcare is so rewarding. It makes me feel so happy when I know I've made a difference in someone else's life." Her nicknames were Bree and Breezy, and she was called a cool cat. Her friends said Breonna always believed she'd be a legend. And to help us go beyond saying her name, we're providing a link here in the chat and comments with 10 actions you can take to support justice for Breonna. As we do this work, we are fortunate that so many of our ancestors have paved the way, have given us the blueprints of resistance, and are cheering us on. Some of our most beloved colleagues joined the ancestors this past year, and to honor them, I'd like to share this video with you.
I'm here to remember Diane Rodriguez, a dear friend and mentor who I shared an office with for many years at Center Theater Group, laughing, crying, talking about life. Diane was an actress, a director, a producer, a playwright, a collaborator, an activist, an artist, a mentor, fashionista. She was also a friend, an aunt, a sister, a wife, a daughter. We love you, Diane. Your impact will live with us forever. Diane Rodriguez, presente.
Diane Rodriguez has changed my life in a million different ways over the last 13 years, all for the better. And I've had the privilege of receiving these lessons, spoken and unspoken, and even being able to pass them on to future generations of arts leaders. But if I had to lift up one thing about Diane, it would be her incredibly strong belief that we have the ability to harness our power. That collectively, with a strategy, no matter the system of oppression, we could move mountains.
You know, Diane and I were in a place where we could jam on her next big idea to shake up the American theater, and maybe it was over lunch or dinner or drinks, but it was always with a lot of laughs. And I was starting to learn from her, really, how to lead from a generous place that holds doors open and lifts people up and pushes issues into a new place. And her imagination was so big. And I know that I'll be going back to those memories I have with her to continue to learn from always.
Renee's vision around a commitment to rigorous classical work, deep text analysis. Sometimes I know some actors like, oh my God, so much text analysis, and just a joy and love for this form. What are lessons that we can still learn from Renee Bush about fortitude, persistence, rigor, love, passion, and aspiration? I would say, like wanting to be the best at what you do, and encouraging others to do the same. So. This is for Renee. We miss him. He lived a long and beautiful life, and I hope that his legacy lives on.
René me dio la bienvenida al teatro hace 10 años y gracias a él todavía estoy allí. Así que prefiero recordarlo con toda la alegría de mi alma por el gran maestro que fue para mí, por su humildad y por su amor a las artes, a su país y a todos los teatristas. Gracias.
René enriched New York and American theater with his devotion to the classics, to new relevant works, to the art of rotating repertory, and to his deeply felt Hispanic roots. His legacy is a thriving Spanish language theater company that continues his vision into its 6th decade. In 1988, he is quoted as saying, "I am the luckiest man in the world. I'm doing exactly the work I want to do in exactly the way I want to do it, with the people I want to do it with. I think I'm going to have to pay for all this good fortune sometime, somehow."
Walter Dallas was a talented and highly skilled theatrical artist. His ability to communicate the spirit and the soul of a play was genius. Last year, he asked me to write about his life. With his many national and international credits, he was a highly respected inspiration to his students and professional artists. We all embrace his artistic magic. I speak your name, Sir Walter, and we all thank you.
Riyad Ismat was a Syrian playwright, director, theater scholar, and critic. He was a dear friend to me and Malik and to Silk Road Rising, a man of enormous integrity and wisdom. Riyad's art advanced a vision of Syria that was democratic, pluralistic, and just. His vision will persist. Rest in peace, dear friend, Riyad Ismat.
Lee Kenneth Richardson set out to alter the course of not just Black theater history, but American theater history. Lee Richardson was passionate, fiery, emotional. He was an energetic dynamo. He wanted to build upon the legacy of the Negro Ensemble Company. He didn't want Crossroads just to have great acting, but he wanted great sets and great costumes and great scripts. He wanted to relentlessly pursue excellence.
Black theater, as any theater, has many different facets, many different aspects. You know, we want to try to explore as many of those as possible. So we just want to do as much about the Black experience as we can.
Thank you, Lee Richardson, for a job well done.
Lee Kenneth Richardson, my friend, I will continue to uplift the importance of your passions, your desires to tell our stories, to uplift our culture, and to do the work, man. I mean, just do the work, putting excellence first. That's how I remember Lee. I miss you, Lee.
June Maida, extraordinary artist and wonderful human being. As a person, he brought his own special light into the room with him. Thank you, Jun Maeda, for your singular artistry and your genius as a theater maker and set designer.
Kevin, I first knew him as a drummer. I've known him as the husband of Muriel. I've known him as before he was the husband of Muriel, and he was the friend of Muriel. I've known him as the father of Josie. I've known him as being a part of an extended family from the Indigenous community. But the image that I have the most of him, that defines him the most for me, is that he was a musician, a drummer particularly, and a singer. He was the center of this musical ensemble that he created, that he was there, being the bass note, being the foundation of everyone's life. It's hard to imagine life going forward without that presence, Kevin.
I want to thank Annabelle Guevara and Erica Kramer and everyone else that contributed their messages for their efforts in making that video. And now, it's my great pleasure to welcome Larissa Fasthorse to the screen. Larissa is more than just a friend and trusted colleague. I am deeply grateful for her labor, her continued advocacy for larger inclusion of Native and Indigenous colleagues, as well as for her artistry as the playwright of What Would Crazy Horse Do?, the Thanksgiving play, Urban Res, and many more. She also serves on the TCG's board, where her contributions have changed not only TCG as an organization, but the lives of so many of her board members. If you're watching right now, I encourage you to honor her work as a TCG board member and beyond in the chat or comments. That can be a start at saying how much we love and honor Larissa Fasthorse. Larissa, the mic is yours.
You make someone cry first. Oh, okay. Yeah, thanks. Hey, my friends, I put a link, to the article about Native Nation because we're going to do something a little different. We were not going to talk that much about the show itself, and we're just going to talk about actual Native people. So first, I must thank our Black brothers and sisters who fought to make sure that us Indigenous peoples would have a voice at this conference during this week in this time. They fought for us because we no longer accept us or them. We no longer accept the binary of Black or white in America. We no longer accept scarcity and the idea that for one of us to be heard, the other must be silenced. We believe in abundance. We understand that our histories in this place called America are interwoven through the same systems of oppression and hate. And we know that our liberation is bound together. So, why must Indigenous voices specifically be heard at this conference during this week, in this time? Because this place called America, this place where we make theater and live, this place where we protest and die, is built on Indigenous lands and people. The moment that Columbus came to this hemisphere and immediately enslaved or killed all of the people he met, the foundation for America was laid. And we are telling you today, the foundation is rotten. Whatever new we try to build on that foundation will collapse. Whatever liberation we strive for now will fail, as long as we continue to ignore the fact that this foundation is rotten through and through. So we are here today to pull up the floorboards, break open the cement, and bring this rot into the light. In our limited time today, our goal is simply to crack the foundation and shine a light to illuminate some of the rot and ways to start rebuilding a strong, secure foundation for every single one of us. We were meant to be in Arizona today. So we will start with naming the many tribes of that state. The following video is how we opened the immersive experience Native Nation. Then a Cornerstone Ensemble member and TCG Fox Fellow, Kenny Ramos, will guide a brief teaser of what the immersive experience was all about. This was performed a year ago, but you will hear constant intersectionality of issues of Black America today, because we are all standing on that same foundation and it is rotten. Okay, now as theater artists, my friends, because we are at TCG, Michael Garces and I need you to know that because of the immersive nature of this experience, we had to shoot it during the day without the benefit of our beautiful lighting design. And it was also done in 103-degree heat. So our small audience is all clustered off screen in the shade where they should be for their safety. So imagine large crowds and beautiful lighting at night. Let's show the video.
Auction Indian Community, Cocopah Indian Tribe, Colorado River Indian Tribes, Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation,
Auction Indian Community,
Indian Tribe,
Cocopah Indian Tribes,
Indian Community,
Colorado River Indian Tribes, Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation, Fort Mojave
Auction Indian Community,
Gila River
Cocopah Indian Tribe, Colorado River Indian Tribes, Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation, Fort Mojave
Auction Indian Community, Cocopah Indian Tribe, Colorado River Indian Tribes,
Hopi Tribe, Yavapai Tribe, Kaibab Band of Paiute Indian, Navajo Nation,
Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community,
Wallapai Tribe, Kaibab Band of Paiute Indians, Navajo Nation, Pascua Yaqui Tribe, Pueblo of Zuni, Cochan Tribe, Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, San Carlos Apache Tribe, San Juan Southern Paiute, Tohono O'odham Nation, Tonto Apache Tribe, White Mountain Apache Tribe, Yavapai Apache Nation, Yavapai Prescott Indian Tribe.
Haukam Mayuth Minue, Inyach Kenny Ramos, Ichihi, and Yanue, we Ichihi Benegas, Napum Welch Kwekamak, Barona Indian Reservation Kapai. Hi, my name is Kenny Ramos. I'm Tegenyo Ipai Kumiai from the Brona Band of Mission Indians. I grew up on the Brona Indian Reservation in San Diego County, and I played Kathan in Native Nation.
The apocalypse is already here. Back home, people are dying every day from bad food and curable diseases and alcohol and drugs and rejection. I'm 22 years old and I've already been to so many funerals. I can't even count them all. I hear my phone buzz and I don't think who's texting me. The first thing I think is who died.
I did expect this. Okay, the magic of it, because I did a play with Cornerstone Theater Company and Larissa and Michael John Garces 3 years ago called Urban Res. And so I was a part of that whole process, which was gathering stories and then producing a full play that was immersive and simultaneous, that was about the local community. And that experience changed the trajectory of my life. So many different stories going on, and we have all these activities that are about American Indian issues that pretty much all of our communities face, no matter where you are in the country.
Is this appreciation or appropriation? You decide.
Your shirt is a racial slur, as defined by the dictionary.
The subject of missing and murdered Indigenous women is a tough one, but we created this space to educate, to help, and to understand.
Food sovereignty isn't an abstract concept of organic eating or big farming. It's life and death. We have our Hopi chef, Derek Melvin, and our Yaqui tribal member, Esther Almazan, who have prepared a special treat for you all. It is prickly pear cactus juice from Tucson and an indigenous food that his grandma called blue marbles.
being a part of this process really helps you grow and it helps you heal in a lot of different ways. And especially as Native people, because we have such a unique history of oppression within this country and oppression that's founded in United States policy and settler colonialism. But through theater, we're able to express that pain, and we're also able to educate non-Native folks about what it is that we deal with.
Because I'm sick of going to a funeral every weekend.
We all are.
Yeah, like, not to mention, I went to 2 last week.
Luann tried to be the 3rd. We have to do something radical to change things back home.
Kathan, you keep saying that, but what do you mean?
Protests and marches get attention now, especially with high school kids leading them. We put you, Damien, Lozen, and Troya in the front of the march. Or even better, we arrange a protest at the next ceremony, a big one.
And you want to make every Native in the country hate us. Protest the ceremony.
But they would hear us.
Hear us saying what?
That it's not okay to exclude trans people from ceremony.
I think that Native people, because we come from an oral tradition and we are raised on stories and our culture and histories have been passed down through telling stories, we have a natural knack for theater because theater is just storytelling. We just don't always have the opportunities to do that. But Native people, we've been telling stories since time immemorial, since before colonization, we've been telling stories. So it's very natural for us to do theater. And so for us to have that opportunity is like amazing. And yeah, so I'm really quite filled with love and with like the power of this experience to be doing this with the local Native people is really just unlike anything ever. It's really a career highlight, and I don't know, I just love it.
Great. So I invite all of my Native Nation folks to please come on screen with me and make sure we can see everybody. Hey, everyone. So while you're coming on screen, Native Nation was produced by ASU Gamage and Cornerstone Theater Company. It was a 2-year engagement project that ultimately presented the work of around 400 Indigenous artists in its final presentations. You can read extensively about Native Nation online, although most recently through American Theater Magazine, which I put in the chat and is also up on Convene right now. Today, my collaborator, Michael John Garces, and I continue to use the process that we use to create Native Nation by having a handful of the 38 Indigenous cast members speak to you about whatever is on their hearts. Now, in that process, we would then translate these desires into performance. But today, you're just going to hear them. Michael is here off screen, just so you know, and he is doing what he always does in our long collaboration together. He is holding space and giving support to the Indigenous communities that we both serve together. There will be links in the chat for ways to learn more and to take action. Each speaker will introduce themselves. So first, to give you context of what it means to grow up Native in Arizona, I'd like to invite to the screen Maria. And the rest of us will stop showing our video. Maria.
Maria, hold on, you're muted. Maria, can you unmute yourself, please? There you go.
Okay, sorry. Skoksardik, everyone. Aninap Chukik, Maria Chavez. Good morning, everybody. My name's Maria Chavez. I'm from Salt River, the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, which is based right outside of Scottsdale, Arizona, and north of Mesa, Arizona. Our reservation is not as big as some, but it's about 52,000 acres, and we hold 19,000 acres of it in reserve so that it's preserved, and we always have our natural land here for us. But I wanted to talk a little bit today about discrimination, and I know that a lot of people, and I'm sure everybody feels it in some way or another, may not be as prevalent as some others, but I'm just going to give you my experience growing up here in Salt River. Again, my mother is full-blooded Pima from Salt River. However, my father is full-blooded Mexican. And so we moved out here when I was like about 4 years old, and that was in about 1956. I didn't go to school for another 2 years before I entered into my school years, and I went to the Salt River Day School, which is the school here on the reservation. My first year of school, oh my God, it was such a great experience. I had such a great time. I enjoyed being with everybody, and the teacher was just wonderful. Her name was Miss Rowe. Never forget her. And I felt everything was good. But I guess around second to third grade, I started feeling the distance that I was feeling from the other kids. And then as time went on, by the time I was about fourth and fifth grade, it was really bad to the point where, you know, they would be saying mean things to me, like, and not just to me. I have brothers that went to school there, so they were getting the same thing. We were either getting beat up or we were getting yelled at, and, you know, things. I still remember the lady, you know, growing up here on the reservation, you end up seeing the same people most of your life. And I do still see a lot of these people and remember the things that they said to me. And they probably don't remember themselves, but, you know, when it's said to you, you feel it and you remember it, and it just buries itself in your heart, but it comes out a lot of times. I remember this one day I was sitting on the side of the cafeteria after lunch, and I was sitting by myself because nobody would play with me. And this guy walked up to me and he said, "Hey, Maria, why don't you come play basketball with us?" And I told him no. I said, "It's okay. You don't. I don't have to go, or you don't have to ask me," or something like that. I don't remember my exact words, but I was telling him no. And he was kind of, you know, he was being real nice, and he was saying, "Oh, come on, come play." And his cousin, who most of the families, of course, lived next door to each other. Well, she was walking by, two of them, and one of them started yelling at him and was called him out by name and said, "You better get away from her. I'm telling Mama, you know you're not supposed to talk to her. You're not even supposed to be near her. They're not from here." And he told her, he looked back and he said, "Go ahead, tell on me. I don't care." And he turned back and he was asking me to go play again. And the other cousins started yelling things at him too. And so I told him, "You better just leave because you're going to get in trouble." So anyway, he did leave eventually. And I never forgot that. And I still, like I said, I see those two ladies now. But, you know, all I can do is be as nice as I can be to them. I always smile at them. I say, "Hello, how are you?" You know, and try and forget that, put it behind me. But like I said, you know, I forgive them, but I can't forget it. And so there are a lot of incidences like that happened. And then as I grew up, started the workforce, started working. I worked at a JCPenney downtown in Phoenix, and they used to have the little snack bars, and I worked at the snack bar. And there was one employee, he would come to the snack bar every day to eat, but he would never let me take his order. I would walk up in front of him and just smile and say, "Hi, how are you? You know, what can I get you today?" And he would turn and look at somebody and call the other waitress's name and say, "Oh, can you get me a cup of coffee, or can you give me, you know, whatever it is." And every day though, when he sat down, if he was in my area, I would always smile at him and do my best to be the best person that I can be, because I can only take care of me. You know, I can't control how anybody else is. And that took me a while to realize that, but I did. And I try and tell I told my kids that, you know, and I told my grandchildren that, and now I have great grandchildren. And you know, I have, well, you don't know, but I have 7 great grandchildren. And so I try my best to hope and pray that the things are not the same for them as it was for me, because even here in Salt River, things have gotten better, because as time went on, the years have passed, there have been a lot of intermarriages now. Whereas, like I said, back in like 55 and 56, when we moved out here, we were like one of the very first families that moved here that were not full-blooded Pimas. And so, you know, I can understand where that came from. And you would really hope, or I would really hope, that in time that has eased up and that things have gotten better. And I sure hope that my grandkids and great grandchildren are not going through that same thing. You know, I actually work at an elementary school. I work at the Salt River Elementary School. I've now worked for my community for this August will be 22 years in the school system. And I work as the parent and community involvement specialist. And with that, I work with families, and I try my best to help them with anything that they need. A lot of times, well, obviously, we haven't had a principal or a superintendent out here that is not a community member, not an enrolled Salt River community member. So they're always from the outside. And so a lot of times our families don't want to talk to them. So that was my role intentionally, was to be able to be a bridge for them and be able to talk for the families, and then to maybe our administration. And I really, really enjoy that, because to me, I'm finally in a place where I can help somebody, and I can make them feel that, you know, that they don't need to be afraid, and that they have somebody here to help them out. So anyway,
Thank you.
I just,
that means so
that's
much,
what I
Maria.
feel.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank
you
you.
sharing it.
Thank you for listening.
I won't, because I thought that's a perfect segue that you were saying about to Rocio, who I know is dedicating her life through her degree she's pursuing now at ASU to nutrition and Native people. And I'd love to have her talk about that, because I think that goes right into what you were talking about. Thank you. Rocio?
Hello, everyone. So my name is Rocio Marquez. I'm Mexican, Pima, and Hopi. I'm also from Salt River. And when we started Native Nation, Michael and Larissa asked us for our input on the script. And one thing that was heavy on my heart was like always going to funerals, which you probably heard from the beginning of Kenny speaking about that in his monologue. I felt like I was always going to funerals when I was little, and the first one I can remember was I was 5, and I went to my grandpa's funeral. He was the first sheriff in Maricopa County, but he developed diabetes and had to have his leg amputated, and ended up dying on the operating table. So that, you know, just like I said, growing up, all these funerals really, really traumatized me. So I felt like that really, we needed to talk about that in the play. And diabetes, as well as other, you know, stuff, affects our people a lot. I'm sure the whole world, yes, but as Native Americans, us even more. Like in 1962, there was a geneticist named James B. Neal. He did just like tests, like blood tests and stuff like that with the Native Americans in Arizona, and found out that we have a thrifty gene, it's called. And this thrifty gene helps us keep on body fat more so that we survive longer periods of famine. So we're like predispositioned to, you know, gain weight and more quickly than others. And that's not helping with our health. And then also just the confinement to reservations, how the government put us all there and, you know, gave us a crate of crap food to eat that we had to figure out what to do with, you know, devoid of nutrients. So we've lost how we used to eat, how we used to hunt. That's added on. And then like we live in isolation, and a lot of people are lonely or bored, and of course they're going to turn to drugs and alcoholism. So that's other, you know, big thing on the reservations that doesn't help with our health problems. A lot of us live in poverty. In 2016, 31% of the Native American people lived in poverty. And, you know, we don't have a lot of job opportunities on the reservation. I'm very fortunate to be from Salt River, where we actually have casinos, because not everyone does. And we also have land that we're leasing to companies where we get a small percentage of that. And a lot of tribes don't. And also our school systems, that's not up to par as the city schools. So even if like we graduate, our attainment of knowledge is not as high as the city ones. And even if we get a job in the city, we also face discrimination there. So it's just hard. Being confined to reservations has set us up not only for a life of financial hardship, but decline for our health. And that's really important, that I just really wanted to talk about, just the decline of our health. But thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Rosia. Next we want to hear from one of our young folks, Lorraine. Lorraine is only a year out of high school, but she is an activist with many years of organizing under her belt already. And she's been organizing everybody, not just her fellow youth, but so many people. So I'm excited for you to all hear from this young woman. Go ahead, Lorraine.
Tagad Donna Huan, Lorraine Kuligunsa, Sabine Sadash Flagotza, she took Bunish St. Cross Apache tribe Ditnasha. Hello everyone, my name is Lorraine Cooley and I come to you from the beautiful tribe of St. Cross Apache. My experience with Native Nation has not only been eye-opening, but a way for me to educate others around me. I was a part of the youth story with the Native Nation that we touched on teen pregnancy, we touched on youth activism, we touched on suicide, and also, you know, discrimination within the LGBTQ community within ceremonies. And for me, all of those aspects, all of those epidemics that we face on our reservation has touched home for me, because I have so many friends, I have family members who are a part of the LGBTQ plus community. I have, you know, classmates of mine, many classmates of mine who had to struggle with teen pregnancy. I had, you know, growing up, I had to fight for my land, the Oak Flat land, for so many years, starting at the age of 10 till now, we are still fighting. And even so, suicide is a huge, huge, huge factor within our reservation, my reservation, and within the Indian country as well, because the Native American people, we are the smallest percentage in the world. And with that being said, that means that the drugs and alcohol rates, the suicide rates, every bad thing that we have to face, we're number one in. And that is why, like Rosie said, you know, attending funerals, that so many funerals has, you know, traumatized me as well, because I have lost so many family to drugs and alcohol, to, you know, drinking and driving, to suicide. I've lost so many classmates, so many close friends, and I have lost so many family to this day, that I feel with the Native country that we need to turn around. We need to make a change, but with that change, it's not going to come overnight. We have to learn how to utilize what we can by educating ourselves, going to college and beyond college, by leaving our reservations, by stepping out of our comfort zones and educating people who are non-Native about us, about what we have to face, about what we have to overcome. Right now, in today's world, we're facing racism that we have faced for decades, not just with the Native Americans, but with other people of color as well. And to that, I say, we need to stop tearing each other down. We need to stop thinking badly of one another and instead uplift one another, you know? And that is why today I am very happy to be here with each and every one of you to discuss topics that mean so much to me. So thank you, Ahia.
Thank you, Lorraine. Our youth, my friends, we've talked a lot this week about our youth, and we're so fortunate in these projects we get to have youth and elders and everybody in between, and they all contribute so much. Thank you. Next is one of our beloved elders, Rosetta. I just want to uplift as part of the activism that happened within the theater experience that we created last year, that during Native Nation, Rosetta was leading real life activities around missing and murdered Indigenous women, talking about real women, getting people to real advocacy. She had a place to sign up for voter registration. All of that was part of the piece. And also at the same time, she was testifying over at the state capitol to get an Arizona bill passed to help track those women. But she does so much more, and she wants to share with you some of those things today. Thank you, Rosetta.
Good morning. This is Rosetta Walker coming to you from Tempe, Arizona. I'm Sakangu Lakota from the Rosebud Sioux tribe, living here in Arizona on the land of the Akmil and the Atam peoples. I had a wonderful experience with Native Nation. It was a life-changing experience and opened the door of opportunity for so many other things. And I thank Larissa and Michael Garces for having us, for allowing us the time and space to participate in Native Nations. Thank you for the shout out for the activism. Yes, Arizona House Bill 2570 is a law here in Arizona signed by Governor Doug Ducey. The study committee created by that law is currently holding sessions and will present a state report to the governor's office in November. Moving beyond the missing and murdered Indigenous women, my activism has also taken me into the realm of voter registration, which I did have a booth that was manned by my husband. I voluntold him to come help me out at the Native Nation sessions. And I do help with registration at the naturalization ceremonies at the Sandra Day O'Connor Federal Courthouse. And during the naturalization ceremonies, the new citizens that have taken their oath of citizenship now have the right to vote. They've granted many new rights with their citizenship, but you got to realize some of those rights that they're granted today, Native peoples here in Arizona and across the United States weren't given that same right. In looking at the Native vote, in 1924, Native Americans were granted citizenship by President Calvin Coolidge when he signed the Indian Citizenship Act. But they weren't allowed to vote until 1948. And then that right to vote was also fought state by state by the individual tribes. The last state to allow Native Americans to vote was the state of Utah in 1962. And then you got to realize in that time frame, we were fighting for the right for civil rights. And here we are fighting for the right to vote in 1962. So Native Americans went to war. We fought in World War I, World War II, came back, these combat veterans came back to their tribal lands here in Arizona and didn't even have the right to vote, even though they fought for their country. So 2 Native American combat veterans came back to the Fort McDowell, Yavapai, Apache reservations, found out they didn't have the right to vote, and so they sued the state of Arizona and won that right. So each and every one of us in the state of Arizona can thank them for allowing us the right to vote here. So along with that right to vote, we also have come across as late as 2018 in the state of North Dakota, where they were doing voter suppression for not having a street address on the reservation. So that's a whole nother gambit of voter suppression there, where we don't have street addresses on our reservations. We didn't have to have them. We had one post office, if anything. And now they're saying you can't get a ballot if you can't show a street address on your driver's license or state ID. So that is another form of voter suppression. So there's always these constant battles that we're fighting. You know, here it is, to 2020, and we're still fighting for the right to vote. Which leads me into my other little segment in my activism is everybody should take part in the census. Census only happens every 10 years. So we have to decide in our communities voter allocation where our redistricting lines are, who gets the federal funds, what schools get funded, and that all happens by filling out your census. So from that point, I'm also on a political campaign. And I do this because as an elder in my community, we've got to do these things. We have to partake in them because if we don't, who will? And all I ask of you today is register to vote. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosetta. You do so much work. We're touching on like this much work that Rosetta does. If you're in Phoenix, you will see her at least 5 times a day at different events and activism spaces. She's incredible. So I'm going to take a quick moment to say, I think we're going to have some time for some questions for our panelists at the end. We have a few more people to go. So if you have questions, there's 3 ways to get them to us. You can do the QA at the bottom of your screen. You can type them in the chat. Or if you're on YouTube, go ahead and type them there. And I'm going to ask someone from TCG to go ahead and support by sending them back over here for Michael Garces to sort and get to us. All right, thank you so much, my friends. So next we have someone almost all of you already know and love, Kenny Ramos. He's got plenty to say, so I'm not going to say any more. Go for it, Kenny.
Am I on? Can you see me?
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Go, I'm trying to start video. Okay, welcome, anyway, Inyach Kenny Ramos, Wichihi. Hi, everybody, I'm Kenny Ramos. I'm Kumeyaay from the Brenna Band of Mission Indians. That was me in the video, but I grew a mustache in quarantine, so that looks a little different. Yes, I'm coming to you from my ancestral tribal homelands, Kumeyaay Amut, which is, you may know as San Diego County. And I'm just so grateful for the time for Indigenous voices to be uplifted and listening to my Native Nation family talk about just all the different issues that we face still today. There's just so, oh gosh, sorry, I have a lot of energy. I guess to share a little bit also about myself to kind of let you know where I'm coming from. I grew up here and I grew up doing theater and loving theater so much. And when I started working professionally as a teenager right out of high school, and then I really started to reflect and see how much of my experience in the American theater was absolutely racist, being forced to cut my hair for some shows when I did not want to, being forced to play stereotypes of Indians in shows like Peter Pan and Annie Get Your Gun. And that all was very damaging to my identity development, to the point where when I was a UCLA student studying American Indian Studies, I came to the conclusion that theater was not a place for Indigenous people, that someone like me, a contemporary Native person from my community, from in tune with my culture, I was not accepted in the American theater. So I stopped doing theater for about 6 years. And it wasn't until, fast forward to I was 26 and I was part of Urban Res, the development of that with Larissa, with Michael John Garces, with Cornerstone Theater Company, and that completely changed the entire trajectory of my life. And since then, I've been working in the American theater and really being able to see some of the progress that we're making in terms of how Indigenous communities and tribal nations are represented and able to be a part of this beautiful art form that has so much power, especially for communities that have been historically and systematically silenced by policies and by just everything that everyone's saying. The idea that a reservation is separate from the rest of, this society is no mistake. Like, we are systematically made to be invisible and suppressed and silent. So there's just, I think, to me, no better antidote for that than being able to tell our stories and share our experiences through theater. One thing I'd like to talk about is, and we've kind of been talking about this week in terms of, yes, this dismantling white supremacy. Yes, we need to. And also what performative allyship, right? Because one of the things I've been seeing a lot in recent years is land acknowledgement, people acknowledging the land that they're on, which is great. It is such a good start for people to come into that understanding that they are standing on stolen land. They are standing on unceded land, that Indigenous blood had to be given for you to stand on that land today. And it is such a great little itty bitty first step in a long road of what it means to really, come to Indigenous sovereign justice, or just justice for everybody, really. So I guess, oh gosh, okay, sorry, I'm excited. The thing is, we're not going to dismantle white supremacy with a land acknowledgement. I guess I want to know, or I want to challenge or think about, what are our institutions doing to actively engage and develop relationships with the tribal communities and the Native nations whose land they are currently occupying? It is one thing to acknowledge the history, but it is a whole nother thing to actually put that into practice and to start to do the work. And it's not easy work, it's a lot of hard work to develop these relationships with tribal nations and tribal communities, and to bring us into the American theater. Like I believe we are begging to be a part of it. And there's just so much power and so much good that can come out of having Indigenous people part of your institutions. And I'm not talking about just casting us, although please cast me, I would love to be cast. But also, I mean, like Indigenous designers, Indigenous people working in the box office, like Indigenous people on the board, Indigenous people, like we will not see justice until we really see Indigenous presence in this society that has been built on the foundation of keeping us quiet, keeping us away, keeping us invisible. So I'm really, while I'm really happy to see the progress that we're making in this renaissance of American Indian theater, of Native American presence in the American theater, I'm really hopeful for the future, especially at this moment in time when we're talking about apocalypses, right? Or we're talking about dismantling systems, and I'm really excited for the rebirth of that, because to me, it would be a radical future for the American theater to actually have Indigenous people present, people who are connected to their communities, who are in tune with their culture, who are connected to their homelands and in tune with the knowledge that we gain from those connections. And to me, it's a very exciting future. And kind of back to Larissa's opening point, like, Black liberation and Indigenous sovereignty, those things are like bound together. And it's just more important than ever and more crucial that we stand together. We have stood for other communities here on this land. We stand for you. We need you to stand for us as well. And I'm just really grappling with what is this deep solidarity look like between our communities, and how can we build that? How can we get to that, to build a better and just future for our society? Anyway, okay, I don't know if I think I'm good. But I would really, okay, yes, 30 seconds left. Great,
Awesome.
Sorry. Yeah, okay.
You're not just good, you're awesome. You're amazing. We love you. And thank you so much, Kenny. And I will add, my personal challenge now that I've been throwing out to all the theaters is that every single theater, people keep asking me what the future of theater should look like. And I say it should look like every single theater company in America has an Indigenous person from the lands on which you are standing and profiting in your institution, in a position of power, in a position of cultural guidance. Every single theater company, that's where we have to start. Again, the foundation is rotten. We have to start with the foundation and then build social justice for everyone else from there. That said, our next speaker is Seisha. Seisha, I'm not even going to say anything because she has opened my eyes to so many incredible ways of looking at the world from the Indigenous perspective in Arizona. So many wonderful things and so many really horrible things. And I'm just going to let her talk because she's got plenty to say. Seisha, go for it. You're muted, Seisha.
Hi, Toilini Nishla, Tachini Bashishtin, but Tani Dashiche, Kiani Dashanella, Seisha Napa Yanishne. Hi, my family, my people. My name is Seisha Napa, and I had a really excellent experience with Native Nation, and it wouldn't have been possible if Larissa and Michael Garces and Cornerstone Theater hadn't come to the come to the Valley and really engage with community. And I just happened to see something on social media and showed up at a event, and they were asking about what are your experiences. And then all of a sudden it was, open casting call. And I just wanted my daughter to get an experience of being around Native actors and Native theater. And then all of a sudden I'm auditioning, and I got a call back, and then they said, "Hey, Seisha, you're part of the cast, but we don't know what you're gonna play yet." And I ended up being my character was an auntie who was raising her niece. And it touched me a lot, because I spent 3 years raising my niece and nephew when my sister was not able to. And just being in the presence of Larissa and this script and the development of this script, it was, Larissa planted all these seeds, and talking about Native mascotry, about Indigenous women's issues, and then also about our Native vets and homelessness and mental illness, and how we deal with that. And for me, all of that came down to, especially living here in Phoenix, interactions with local police. And this is a very, very important issue, especially in this time and environment that, I show up in solidarity for people who are not Indigenous, and it really would make my heart happy to see the wider community show up when people like John T. Williams are murdered by police. He was murdered by Seattle PD in 2010. L'Oreal Sinigini in Winslow in 2016, and both of these people had interactions with police that ended up in them being murdered. And a lot of this comes from local budgets, right? And so it just makes my heart happy to see people show up, especially here in Phoenix. 8,000 comments to city council to say, defund the police, don't give them any more money. They have $745 million in the city budget. And our response to mental illness budget-wise is this much, whereas Phoenix PD budget is this much. And if you call 911 and say there is somebody on the street threatening to walk into traffic, then they want to harm themselves, they want to kill themselves, they send the police. Native people have lots of interactions with the police because we have a higher rate of homelessness here, and especially our elders. And it's just a shame that a lot of our interactions on public transportation just within the community are with police. And at the city budget, I was watching on YouTube and just hearing 100% people saying the police have to come under control. We have to do something about police. We have to defund the police. We have to move money to community programs for our youth, for our elders, for mental health, all these things. And just watching our youth flex in front of their elected officials. And this is where we need to have our support, is with our youth. And because this historical trauma requires a generational response. And I think that definitely is with our youth, especially with people like Lorraine. And one of my heartfelt organizations that I've been a part of is Put Air in Action. I shared some links, so I'm hoping that those links come up. Put Air in Action is an organization that is grassroots. We are working to educate not only community, but youth, to have representation at city council, at school board meetings, and to actively decarcerate and also decriminalize just being POC, Native, immigrant people within our own communities. And, I've said a lot, I've yelled a lot, but this was really my down the rabbit hole of everything that Larissa and the play touched upon in Native Nation, is that these things are all connected, but really what's the underlying foundation is the inherent worth and dignity of all people. And if that was one thing that Native Nation tried to educate about, is that Native people are here, Native people are people, and we are definitely wanting to be a part of these big things, especially in theater. And again, I would not have been able to be a part of this if Cornerstone Theater hadn't come out and reached out for community. Again, my name is Seisha. I'm all done, and thank you.
Hey, Seisha, you're not done. Can I please ask you, you shared a story with us that I think most, from what I've checked on, most people have no idea about, like the ICE roundups of Native people, and you were talking about protesters being rounded up. Could you just tell us a little bit about that? Because I don't think pretty much anybody is aware of how that affects Native people in Arizona.
Yeah, so over the weekend, so Phoenix hasn't seen a riot proper, right? So what we've seen is protesters show up, exercising their First Amendment rights, and being confronted with violent police and police tear gassing people. And over the weekend, 114 protesters were arrested. Many of them were not able to be released. Normally what would happen is that if you are detained, you would be cited, you would be released, and then you would be let go, right? But what was happening within Phoenix PD is these people were being kept 48 hours without even seeing a judge, which is unheard of. You usually see a judge in a couple of hours. And one of the terrible things is that Phoenix PD continues to cooperate with ICE. Phoenix PD continues to turn over people who are undocumented or possibly documented over to ICE for criminalization and to be turned over to, immigration detention centers. And this is, these are our people. Without this imaginary line that separates Arizona from Mexico, our people used to freely move and engage and move money and goods, right? And so this idea that just because you are in Mexico or Guatemala or somewhere not the United States, you're not allowed to be here, that completely is not in line with what our Native people and who our Native people are and used to function traditionally. So Phoenix PD still operates with ICE. Maricopa's Sheriff's Office still cooperates with ICE, and it's really scary. But we continue to show up.
Yes, thank you. And I gotta say, when we were in Arizona, we heard so many stories of original citizens, Native American citizens that are citizens of America right now, constantly being rounded up by ICE and sent to detention centers, and it was really horrifying. In addition to all of our other brothers and sisters, but anyway, thank you. Just a reminder, we're just about to the end of our individual sharing time. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat, put them in the QA, put them in the chat on YouTube, and someone from TCG will send them over to me here on Zoom, and we will try to answer what we can. Ray is a powerful storyteller in so many contemporary forms, and she uses them to uplift so many people, Indigenous folks. I'm gonna just let her go because she's got a lot of great things to say. Thanks, Ray.
Thank you. It says my video is disabled.
Oh, can someone Abel raise the video? And if you want to start talking, we can hear you though, Ray.
Can you see me? Death Star? Yeah, awesome.
We can see you.
Thank you. Okay, so what I wanted to say was that thank you, Kenny, because you kind of gave me some energy. Who needs coffee when you have Kenny? So I wanted to talk about was decolonization education through modern storytelling. I have my notes over here so I stay on topic. So I wanted you guys to think about how many movies. I come from a film background. Theater is hard. I will give you a shout out because I'm used to cut, do it over, cut, do it. You don't do that in theater. So thank you to all the theater people. But think about how many movies that have Native American. You probably can think of more non-Native actors that play natives on screen. And then even now think about plays. I was, researching a little bit last night as we were discussing this, and one big thing is that our people are always trapped in the past, and which is a huge, huge thing to understand, to know our past, which we need to educate our students and educate our children and educate those people that need to know other than Thanksgiving. You know, I always see posts and Twitter and stuff like, oh, Thanksgiving's a great time to teach about natives. Maybe first tell the real story. Second, you know, there's lots of other times to be talking about natives. And then also, you know, again, like researching movies, John Wayne, John Ford, like they were, you know, filming in Monument Valley with Navajos wearing headdresses and living in teepees. Like I'm so sorry. So before I start, I'm half Dene and I'm half Dakota. I have a little bit of English and a little bit of Irish. My great-great-great-grandmother on my English side was the Queen of England. So if you got that joke, thank you. So anyways, so they, you know, that was a misrepresentation of natives. And now, of course, we have Pocahontas. Like how many times do you have to do that movie? Thanks a lot, Disney, where it's the wrong story, you know? She wasn't, you know, this beautiful like maiden. She died at 22. She was taken and she met John Smith when she was around 11 or 12. So there's all these things that are just misrepresentation of us. Modern plays, I'm happy to announce, like I met Delana Studi. She has her play, And So We Walked, her one-woman show about her journey of the Trail of Tears. That's something modern. And of course, Native Nation. They were able to take our modern day issues, our modern day, you know, what's happening with us and create this entire awesome play by including them into the play. A lot of recently on Facebook, you know, I know a lot of different people from all over the place, and the guy had made a comment or a joke because he's a comedian about Navajo Nation, and when Trump went to, I guess, visit them or talk to them, I can't remember. Anyways, but he, I'm sorry, I said the T word, but he basically was like, oh, you know, the Navajos living in teepees, kind of a comment. So I commented and I just explained to him how that was inaccurate, and I gave him a little education, and I hashtag it, the more you know, the better your joke. So we need to make sure we're including those kinds of people. We need to include people. If you include people about, you know, their lives and what you're writing, and if you include them in, it's going to be funnier. It's going to be better. It's going to be a better, again, representation. Now, of course, we have Lasso Mohicans, Dance with Wolves. In the past, white savior mentality. The biggest one we have currently in film is Smoke Signals. And that's something that a lot of people do talk about, but it's not, again, super mainstream. And then don't get me started on the Twilight movies. And no, we are not werewolves. None of us are. So there is definitely a need to, in order to have us be more present in plays, on TV. One of the things that I was able to attend was a webinar with Heather Ray. She is from Idaho. She's from the tribe up there. She's a native producer and director. And her webinar was actually on how to get more representation on screen. How do we get more representation out there? When you think about it, one of the things that I loved was recently I was watching a PBS series about the author of Crazy Rich Asians. He said the same thing. There wasn't any contemporary stories about his people. And then you look at, you know, history, actual events, and TV series. The TV series Watchmen just recently did one about the 1921 Tulsa race massacre. No one knew about that until that aired. Then people started researching. So we need to have these types of conversation. We need to have this type of research and also representation. My thing is I try to educate in a way of being factual, and I find that works a lot better than trying to force and be angry about it. But this is me, of course. I do have my mom, when I was younger, said I had a very sharp tongue. So I've had to learn how to be able to express myself in a way that was going to get the point across. And naturally, you know, through a medium like theater, TV, books. Granted, with today's world, we have a short attention span. You know, I'm not a huge book reader per se, but you know, you could put me in front of a great documentary, I'll watch it. So I think in order to include everyone in the conversations, we need to be able to have, you know, these difficult conversations, but also understand it's about educating. I have a lot of friends around the world. I just recently went to India last November. We actually discussed the word Indian and you know what? It was a great discussion because here, you know, they thought they were coming to India, therefore that's how we got the name Indian. Versus when I go, you know, and when I went back there, they're like, well, we live in India. We are Indians. So but it was a great conversation to have with people of different cultures. So anyways, I want to end on that, and I appreciate your time, and I hope to see more, you know, stuff out there with us included. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. So we have one more speaker before we go to questions. Esther Almazan she's a playwright, but she took on a unique role in Native Nation. She was a cook for us alongside Hopi chef Derek Melvin to provide traditional food and drink within the experience of Native Nation. She brought things from her culture and shared them with everybody. So Esther, I'd love to invite you in. Thank you.
Thank you, Larissa. My name is Esther Almazan. I'm from Tucson, or in the language of the colonists, Tucson. We are on the colonists' borders, so we're one of the indigenous nations that was split by the border that the colonists set up. We like to say we didn't cross the border crossed us. But I want to talk about a magical thing that happened during Native Nation. I, as Larissa said, was paired up with a brilliant young Hopi chef named Derek Melvin, and he made beautiful blue marbles for the participants to experience. And I made nopales, the cactus pads, and also served the juice from the cactus. And so our first production, we had thought there were going to be about 200 participants. So we overplanned and created our food and made samples, and we had about double that, so we didn't have enough for everybody. And this wonderful piece of kind of spontaneous theater happened where Derek and I were the only witnesses to it, and we were the only performers in it. And so I said, we're not going to have enough of the blue marbles. And he said, I know. So we got a message saying, cut them in half. And I thought that was a great idea. I'm like, great, we can feed people doing this. And Derek said, no, these are blue marbles, represent the earth. My grandmother would not let me cut them in half. He had already told me how sacred the blue marbles are to the Hopi people. And I said, okay, Derek, I'll support you, whatever you want to do. So we have these marbles that some people won't get to experience, but they can still eat the nopales, the cactus that we still had, that we were serving. And he said, okay. He said, okay, I'm not going to cut him in half. He's a very wonderful, kind of underexpressive of everything. So I could tell he was really, really amped up about not doing that. So one thing that happened is we didn't have enough of the serving cups. So I told him, do you want to hold down the center here and I'll go get the cups, or do you want me to do that and you get the cups? He goes, I'll go get them. Well, just before we left, he hadn't seen Native Nation yet. He hadn't been to the rehearsal the night before, and he was fascinated with the actors and the content. And I could see him standing there kind of frowning and listening. And then I looked at him and kind of like, time. So he left and he came back and he said, you know, I was on this trip to get the cups, and they talked about smoke signals in the play. And he said, I love that movie. So I started going through every single line. I guess he knows every single line in the movie Smoke Signals. And he said, I got to the part with Arlene's magical fry bread. And he said, I remember her standing up, and there's that scene in the movie where she rips the fry bread in half and they can feed everybody. I'm like, yeah, that's a great movie. That was a great scene. And he looked at me, he said, we're cutting the blue marbles in half so we can feed everybody here. And we did. And it was this beautiful, beautiful moment of magic. And my partner is also Yaqui. I'm Yaqui. And she said she has a friend named Dusty who always told her every Yaqui needs a Hopi and every Hopi needs a Yaqui. I said, okay. Well, we had each other there. And Native Nation was very, very special to me, a new way to do theater and bring in Native stories. And I'm thankful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Esther. I invite all of our participants here to come on the screen, our panelists, to come on screen. Our first question we have, and so anybody can jump in, is if anyone wants to share about a little bit about the impact of COVID on Indigenous peoples, especially in Arizona, and if there's any resources or ways to help that you want to share. Anyone can answer. A lot of thinking, or not. Yeah, Seisha, go for it.
Kenny, you want? Okay.
Seisha, I think you should go.
Okay, so I live here in Phoenix, but my mother and my aunties and their aunties, they all live on the Navajo reservation proper. And you know, my elders have been really hard hit. I had one grandmother flown down here after she tested positive and she started having complications with her breathing. She just went home after about 3 weeks. Thankfully, she wasn't on a ventilator, but she did have a lot of muscle deterioration. And before they could send her back, they had to do physical therapy. I had one great uncle. I would refer to him as grandfather. He passed away due to COVID at 92 up in Shiprock. And then, you know, just a number of our elders who have come under this COVID illness, compounded with, right, this is the illness, and we're dealing with the symptoms, and we're just trying to get healthy. But when you put on top of that the fact that we live so scattered on Navajo Nation, and basic resources such as, you know, running water within our homes, we many of our people have never had running water within our homes. And again, that my mother is cooking for the family, and she is delivering food and doing all these things out of pocket is at a great expense, because a lot of these items that she's cooking with are just so expensive at the trading post. Or if she does want a good deal on something, she's got to drive about 2 hours out of her way to go to like a Safeway or a grocery store. And you know, and then just not even talking about groceries, but personal protection equipment, you know, masks, hand sanitizer, gloves. These are things that you can't find at the trading post. Again, you have to drive. And so I think that this experience that my family is having on Navajo Nation, you know, is echoed across Indian country, and that these disparities of not just having running water, but having just not enough homes on our Indian country, where you have so many people in one housing unit. And I saw a GoFundMe for a family that had 19 people living under one roof. And if one of them gets, you know, is positive for COVID, how are you supposed to self-quarantine? How are you supposed to take care of your hygiene? How are you supposed to take care of everybody else? And it's just, you know, the death from this illness, COVID-19, is just, I feel, exponentially impacted, because once we lose one of our elders, that is somebody that language loss, culture loss, experiences, right? And so it's just across Navajo, within my family, and across Indian country. Like this is happening, and this is the result of a lot of systemic institutions and funds that don't make it to our native nations.
Kenny, did you want to add something? No, okay. I just want to also lift up in the chat, and I hope this is happening, being sent over to YouTube as well. Michael Garcia has listed a lot of a document with lots of these links that we've been giving you today. Again, this is just cracking this rotten foundation, just cracking the cement, my friends. There's so much more, but we're just have such limited time. There's been several questions around disabled justice and the Indigenous community, around Indigenous folks and disability. And I know that's something that hits us really hard. We have so many folks suffering from a lot of things, and that do not have care either, that the outside world generally has. So we're even farther behind as usual. But I wonder if anyone wants to talk about disabled justice and Indigenous justice and how those are intertwined, or how you've seen them played out in Indigenous communities.
I'll go. Well, this is actually, it's a story that hasn't been, because we talk about what's happening in the world today, and my mom, her godparents on the reservation, on the Crow Creek Reservation, back in, I want to say in the 60s, this happened to the son, and that he was dating a white girl, and she happened, and from what the story is that he was dating the white girl, and there was 5-6 guys that didn't like it, and they ended up actually killing him. And this one of the guys that was there, he was the son of the sheriff of the nearby town. And he actually, after it happened, there was a farmer, a white farmer, who saw it all, and he wanted to, tell what had happened. Well, the day after, that whole road was paved where he was killed. The blood was gone, everything was gone. And then after that, when the the guy that does the autopsy, you know who I'm talking about, he actually lied and said that he was hit by a car, and he wasn't. He was actually really beaten. He was, later on, there was something wrong when one of my uncles was taking care of him. He was like, there's something wrong with him. They had shot him in the head, and the coroner had actually said, he said that he was fine. What again is happening today? They actually took the body to a different coroner outside of the reservation in order for them to see what had actually happened. He was shot in the head, he was completely beaten up, and the only thing that really would help is that farmer, and he was white guy, that farmer, he goes, you boys know what you did. He knows what you did. Of course, all of them got scot off free. None of them went to jail. However, I think them committed suicide. 3 of them ended up with cancer. So it does come back around. This happened in the 60s. This is again happening today. So there's always been some type of discrimination against Native people. There's always been that kind of, well, and also, again, if we don't have social media, how do we know these happens? Because we have to tell them. And so this was a story that we haven't shared this as much, although my aunt, she really wants to share it. She just doesn't articulate it. So this is the first time a lot of people are now hearing about this. So it is something that still today is impacting. I do have a brother who is mentally ill. He is schizophrenic. He's not all there. He doesn't understand certain things. So there is a fear that when he goes out, like Corey, make sure you stay in for, curfew. And he's 6'2", he's, he looks scruffy. Like, how do we, and luckily on my end, knock on wood, when we've had issues and we've had to call the police or we've had to have medical help, they were actually very considerate and they were understood what we needed versus the complete opposite. And we're very grateful for that. But that's, again, one in a very few, so we're extremely lucky. But that's what I wanted to add as far as this story goes.
Thank you, I appreciate that. My friends, this is, the greatest colonizer time. So we are going to have to end. I do want to shout out that we have some other participants. One, Claude had to go speak at a tribal council meeting, so he's busy doing the work. And then we had Matthew and Adrian both had some technical issues, so they were not able to join us. And this is, I can't stress enough, you guys, this is just the beginning. It's so small. We had 100 other things to talk about, but we just had this limited time and want to just crack the foundation a little bit and start. And I hope this is, what I always say with my plays. The point of my plays is to just make you aware of all the things you don't know and get you to start doing your own work. That's all I want you to do. I want you to do your work. I want you to get out there. I want you to start with these links and then just keep going. I want you to then get off the internet and talk to the Indigenous people. They are around you. I can't tell you how many people have said to me, I don't know any Indigenous people. I've never met an Indigenous person before you. And I said, that's not true. I guarantee you it's not true. You have met so many of us and we are with you. We are in your communities. We are in your theaters. You don't even know we're there. Or we leave because there's just no reason for us to be there anymore. So I'm just urging you people, this is a beginning, get to work. do your research, get to know Indigenous people, find out how to make reparations. Every single person on this continent, including myself, who's now living on the lands of Serrano people, need to find ways to make reparations within your capacity to the Indigenous people on whose lands you are profiting from. You are buying everything you have, doing everything you do with blood money, and you need to start paying that back. So let's find out the ways we can do that. I am now going to say thank you to my incredible, wonderful Native Nation family. We're doing our next play in South Dakota with the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota people, following the same process with Cornerstone Theater Company and Michael John Garces and myself. We can use your support. Please go to Cornerstone, find out how to support us. And thank you to TCG. I'm at the end of my term as a board member. It's been amazing. And I'm really been grateful for the platform that they've given Indigenous peoples over the years. I don't know anyone else who's giving Native people, non-Native organizations giving Native people this kind of platform on a national level year after year after year. So thank you for that. And thank you to ASU Gamage and Cornerstone Theater Company, who are both the producers of this project. They were incredible. They did everything and more. Gamage had no idea what they're getting into, and they did it. It was incredible. Michael Reed invited us there and just kept fighting for us. Colleen Jennings, Rogansack, so many community partners in Arizona. If you haven't been there and experienced the incredible beauty of the Indigenous cultures of Arizona, go as soon as it's safe to do so and get to know these people. It was one of the most fulfilling experiences of my life. We had so many community partners, I can't mention them all, but for sure I want to mention Dr. Brian Brayboy at ASU, who was going to be on this panel originally on Tuesday, but then we moved it. He could no longer be here. And he again is in another national committee doing the work. So thank you for that. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye and throw it to Teresa Eyring. Thank you, everyone. Palami Aya.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Larissa. Thank you for being such a great board member and amazing artist and leader in our community. And I'm really, really happy that we were able to make this happen today because, you know, even just the fact that we were planning to be in Arizona for this conference until we weren't allowed to travel anymore, or at least for now. So having these voices and these stories told, I think is especially meaningful and powerful right now. So I want to thank you, Larissa. I want to thank Michael. I want to thank the whole Native Nation team for that sharing. And yes, it's just a beginning. Your call to action is heard. And I really look forward to how we all as a field work together on some of the very specific ways that we can help to uplift the stories and the artistry and the lives of Indigenous communities in this country. So throughout this week, we've been reminded of the power of the art to be at the center of this moment and about what it can and cannot accomplish and of the work we must do ourselves. And as we've done in the past 2 plenaries, I invite you to lift up their work in the Zoom chat and YouTube comments. It's incredibly difficult to transform a major convening, not just once, but twice. And we are deeply moved by so many of you who have stood with us as we reimagined this national conference. We're grateful for your nimbleness, and we're also grateful to our friends and host committee members in Phoenix, where the conference, as I mentioned, was intended to take place. Particularly at this moment, I'd like to thank our funders and our sponsors, as well as the individual donors who've contributed to support this week's convening. The logos of our institutional supporters now should be appearing on your screen, and I invite you to share your thanks in the chat now. Your support has also made it possible for over 1,700 theater students, artists, and practitioners to join us this week, along with the streaming capabilities for sessions to be viewed almost 10,000 times and even more in the weeks to come. We're so grateful for your support. I also would like to thank the session leaders, artists, and panelists who have worked with us to collectively hold ourselves accountable in reframing this conference and for the grace shown by everyone who attended. I'd like to thank the TCG staff. Now, this is a moment where if we were all in a room together, people would start cheering wildly. And so just do that at home, cheer. The staff has worked countless hours to make this week possible, and they've done that while many are themselves protesting and organizing. They've done it while also working second shifts as parents and caregivers. They've done it while mourning the loss of family members and loved ones. Thank you so much for your work, staff. And feel free to give the staff some love in the chat if you're in this session. I also want to thank the TCG board for your guidance in helping us navigate these days of radical change. You've not only supported us as we've made difficult decisions, but urged us to go further, dig deeper, and ask even harder questions. Prior to the outbreak of COVID-19, TCG was in a planning process. When the pandemic hit, we considered pausing because of the uncertainty ahead. But our fearless facilitators, Lisa Yancey and Yolita Crossland, convinced us that the crisis could bring about a different kind of clarity that would help us see the more radical choices for going forward. Our staff and board have come together to work on this plan, and we will continue working on it in the coming months. And yes, though much of what will come is uncertain, we know that as TCG moves through this portal, we will lead with theater making as a central value. We will deepen our commitment to collective action and to equity, justice, and fairness, knowing that our theater field must be more representative of the rich diversity of our world. And we will listen and learn through responsive, useful, and intelligent leadership, ensuring that our values manifest not only externally, but equally hold for how we honor our staff and internal supporters. In the first part of this convening, Convergence, we closed our How We Move Forward session with your powerful calls to action and invitations to witness. We know there will be many more urgent discussions and actions in the days to come. As we close, we invite you to share your own next right acts that you're planning to take, placing them now in the chat, or for even more accountability on social media, using the hashtag #HowWeMoveForward. TCG was founded almost 60 years ago. Amid the fires of these past few months, it feels as if TCG is, in many ways, being refounded, not only by TCG staff and board, but collectively by a field that cannot and will not go back to the way things were. Where there was scarcity, we're working towards abundance. Where power was hoarded, new models of power are being demanded and forged. Where white supremacy and patriarchy dominated, they are being newly challenged and must be dismantled. While that work has been going on for long before this moment and will continue to be the work of generations, the pandemic and uprising are requiring us to more swiftly abandon old, harmful ways of being. We don't know what TCG will look like 6 months from now, let alone a year. We don't know what our field will look like either. But just like our founding mothers of 60 years ago, many of you, many of us have a vision. It is that collective vision, and most especially that of our BIPOC colleagues, our disabled colleagues, our queer and trans colleagues, our survivors, our immigrants and refugees who will lead the way. Let us have faith in each other, knowing that the pain we're feeling may be the pangs of birth. And let us help each other breathe through and lean into that necessary pain. Thank you, and we look forward to gathering with you again soon.